So, welcome to the Time for Impact podcast again, and our second or part two of our conversation with David Coles from the London School of Economics. If you didn't get the opportunity yet to listen to part one of this conversation, you might want to go back and check that out first, although I'm sure you can listen to these in any order you wish and still find value, um, but you might find that useful. In the meantime, if you are staying on, please enjoy our conversation and make sure you subscribe and follow for future episodes. Enjoy.
David, I wondered if we could, I guess, double back a bit on benefits of volunteering. And I guess I'm someone who's very interested in this kind of aspect of dual benefit of volunteering, which we've touched on a few times in this call and seems to be quite important. I'm interested in the dual benefit of volunteering as a sales pitch, but I'm also interested in the dual benefit of volunteering as something that makes us all better or solves problems we have in society. Not just the kind of problems that charities are setting out to try and solve, but just the simple matter of volunteering as part of our social fabric makes things better. Mental health and students. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the NUS website. It's saying here, over recent years, a mental health crisis amongst UK students has emerged. According to a 2019 government report, the number of students in higher education experiencing mental health problems has doubled since 2014-2015, and the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated this issue, with over half of students saying that their mental health has deteriorated as a result. It seems to me here that volunteering has a role to play, or could have a role to play, or could have a more prominent role to play in this. And I wondered, as someone who's been in this environment over the last 13 years, whether you've seen changes in that, and whether you see that crisis, whether you've seen benefits in it, and what the role for volunteering could be in addressing some of that.
I think that's a really important point, and I like to start it by saying I'm not a mental health expert. I've got excellent colleagues at LSE who are, but I do know, I recognise those numbers that you've quoted. In a greater number of students are feeling high levels of stress, feeling depressed, feeling anxious about a whole range of different things within their lives. And I guess we have to be a little bit careful in some ways. My natural instinct, and particularly if I was talking to a funder, would be like, yeah, volunteering is wonderful, it's brilliant, it can make a huge contribution to these areas, and it absolutely can. We know that students that volunteer, have those greater range of friendships, have greater level of empathy and deeper understanding of themselves, and it can bring a lot of joy and happiness. Volunteering, absolutely correct. I always want to be a little bit careful of expectation settings for students, and there is a lot of pressure, particularly around careers and university, getting the most out of university that you can, that I do see students take on too much, and that can obviously lead to an increase in stress and burnout and worry. And I'd hate for the volunteering part of that to be sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back on anyone in life, as saying no is really important, and when to put yourself first is really important as well. And I guess also, lots of issues can also be triggering in volunteering. Let's say you're volunteering for an anti-racist organisation and you're from an ethnic minority. Like, that can be an extremely stressful period, because you're hearing the stories which you might have been affected by over lifetime in many ways, and we can think of lots of different examples in which kind of a important social cause can be triggering for different groups of people. Having said all of that, I think volunteering has an incredible role to play, because it's effectively the greatest act of kindness that you can do. Time is finite for all of us, and how we choose to spend our time is probably the greatest decision we'll ever make. And so if you're going to spend your time giving it to other people and feeling that genuine sense of joy of giving without expecting something in return, that's an incredibly powerful piece of social capital within for all of us that we all benefit from, as you said before. So I think volunteering in really well looked after roles, in opportunities where people can get the support and the flexibility which they might need at different times, adds something which I can't think of any other aspect of life where it can be replicated in the same way. And that's not to say you can't make a difference through your job. Of course you can. But, I get a pure joy when I go and volunteer, probably even more so than I do from doing my job, which is in the voluntary sector. Maybe it's a different sense of satisfaction. So I think we can create really brilliant opportunities and encourage all aspects of society to get involved in that, just to give, because that act of kindness is very, very powerful.
Does that mean that even more so potentially than ever before, the onus is therefore on us as volunteering professionals, as involving organizations, to think about how we're catering for the well-being of the people who volunteer for us? I mean, it feels to me that isn't something we often talk about enough, or if we do talk about it, it doesn't feel deep enough. Like, it feels like sometimes the conversation about employee well-being is deeper than volunteer well-being sometimes, or there's more options or more tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely. And I think I think we need to obviously sort of be sensible about this. Like, if I've got a student turning up for an hour to plant some bulbs that are going to be delivered to a local hospice, I don't need to sort of put huge amounts of like, are you okay with this? Are you doing, like, there are sort of limits. But having said that, it's something that we have spoken about. We actually shared a couple of blogs recently written by Maria McAvoy, who works at Volunteering Matters, about trauma-informed volunteer management, which is something I was kind of alluding to earlier. And I think that is really, really important about if volunteers are going to be dealing with sometimes really, really difficult, complex topics, we do need to think about how we support them, because otherwise, and it's something we see already, is like burnout. You see burnout of staff. Of course, you're going to see burnout of volunteers as well. So I think it's something that isn't hugely spoken about in the sector. As I said, Maria wrote 2 brilliant blogs for us. She said them publicly as well elsewhere. But it's something that we were like, wow, this is really interesting. This is something we can share with our charity partners to maybe like shift their dial about how they think about involving our students, but of course all volunteers as well. There are some really good people out there who are speaking about this already, and maybe as a sector we just need to listen up a little bit more, give them a bit more of a platform.
David, I wonder if you could say something more about intergenerational volunteering. It'd be nice to hear a bit more about not just the young people supporting elder people, but perhaps even more so young volunteers and elder volunteers volunteering together. Because sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, including the people involved, it doesn't seem to quite gel in organisations as well as you would hope, that intergenerational divide. But when it works really well, it feels like there's not just obviously a good relationship, but there's a good sharing of skills and experiences between the generations in both directions. I wonder if you've got any reflections on that from your experience.
I think it's like you say, when it works, it's wonderful. And I've spoken with lots of students before who have really, really enjoyed volunteering with older people. And now, bearing in mind, when you're 19 or 20 years old, an older person might be seen as like 29 years old, is kind of ancient. Certainly when you get to another decade on from that, so yeah, I'm seen as really old. So maybe for a 19-year-old, it's seen as a slightly different thing, that kind of intergenerational between just kind of pensioners and students. But I know our students, they basically want to learn and gain insights. I guess maybe for want of a better word, like life hacks as well, and they recognise that it can be found in older people. One of our programs which we run, we have a consultancy program which charities can kind of put forward a challenge, and our students do a 10-week consultancy piece with them. But for each of those student groups, we recruit an LSE alumni mentor. Now, some of them are just a couple of years out of LSE, so they might only be 23 or 24. But we've had quite a few mentors who are in their 30s and 40s, and they're kind of, or even older, to be perfectly honest, and they're kind of volunteering alongside the students to help, mentor them and make sure they're pointed in the right direction. And that's been really powerful. And I know particularly, like, we work with some excellent local community groups, like Coin Street Community Centre is just across the river from us. We've done a lot of work with them over the years, and obviously, they're a full-on community centre. They've got people in there at a few weeks old, right the way through to, I'm sure they've got members who are 100 years old and come back and volunteer for them. And the students really, really enjoy kind of learning from them. I guess that balance is, that point that you made earlier, Matt, around turning up and feeling welcomed and maybe seeing people who you can relate to in a particular way is really important. So it's about finding that balance, I guess, between empowering volunteers to act as a team and do things together and creating that camaraderie, and making people feel welcomed and secure. And this is a safe space for them to be who it is they want to be, with their volunteering as well. And just acknowledging that learning goes in a two-way direction. As hopefully when I'm 90, I'll be learning things from a 20-year-old, and that's great. It's something I look forward to. And it can definitely go both ways.
I guess coming back to this idea of the language we use and the sort of marketing approach to attract students, and it'd be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about how you market opportunities at LSE. We've talked a bit about how experiences can be designed to appeal to people or not, but almost taking a stage back from the experiences and thinking how we get, people interested in things in the first place. Do you have any tips around that, or any things you've seen that work, or any things that are changing? I'm quite interested in the language we use as well. I'll be I'll fully confess, I always wonder if this is, part of our opportunity, I suppose, or how we can think differently about marketing to really attract people. But I'd be interested in your experiences at LSE, David.
It's one of the most important things that we do. I've got an excellent colleague, Sophie, who does brilliant marketing and comms. But yes, it's a constant question for us. And I think part of the reason it's a constant question is because you maybe never get to the bottom of the answer. It's also always changing as well, like how people talk about things, language for all of us. I've been in the sector for more than 15 years now, and sometimes the word volunteering is like they try to kick it and then it comes back and it's had a bit of a relaunch. And just that word itself, like, what does it mean, and what does it mean to different people around the world as well? We actually had a student come and do some research for us about the concept of volunteering and charity in different cultural aspects, and they compared the UK, South Africa and Brazil, and what does volunteering and charity mean in those different sectors, and the different power dynamics that are associated with that as well. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, and one that will never reach the end of, which I guess keeps it interesting if nothing else. So one of the big things we want to showcase at LSE at volunteering is that it can be easy to find out more. It might not be always easy to volunteer, but there's always doors open to you to find out more and make those first steps for volunteering. And we want to reduce those barriers and make it as easy as possible for a student, even just to book an appointment with me and come and have a conversation about volunteering. I mentioned earlier we have the one-off volunteering program as well, where students they just sign up on an online form, they tick that they're attending, they turn up and get involved. There's no training beforehand. There's obviously no DBS checks or anything like that. So we do want to make it as easy as possible for people to take those first steps, because then once they've made those first steps, they can hopefully continue down the path to doing something which is really rewarding for them. We speak a lot about, as you may have sort of gathered already, a lot about kind of changing the world and making a difference and social impact and what that might mean for a student. We're kind of quite unashamed in that we're saying to students, like, if you want to change the world, we'll help you do that through volunteering. And I think those, we can dream big, and people are smart enough to realize that they're not going to solve all of the world's problems through their 4 hours of volunteering a week, but they can make a difference on something particular where they can see tangible difference is in that. That's why we all volunteer, because we're passionate about that. So we look to inspire and empower students. Inspiring is probably the easier part of my job in many ways. I'm at a social sciences university. Our students understand about big issues facing the world. They're talking about them every day in lectures and studies. But to be perfectly honest, everyone across the country is the same. Everyone watches the news and sees what's going on, and they're passionate about the type of world in which they would want to live in. The more interesting and more important part of my role, I guess, is taking maybe sometimes visceral anger or upset about how things are working, and then being able to translate that into a tangible action where people feel like I am making a difference. And so we talk a lot about that, about not just the why you should volunteer, but how you go about doing that as well, how you can find an opportunity which you're going to be able to fit into your work week. How are you going to find an opportunity where, if you're passionate about homelessness, you're going to see that you're doing something for it? So there's lots of hows, not just whys, once we started that conversation.
It'd be good to get your reflections on some of the technological questions as well around volunteering. So I'm thinking, back to your how people volunteer. They could be volunteering online, of course. How do we market volunteering, the social media angles? How do we communicate with volunteers? There's lots of volunteer management apps, for instance, these days that are available. How do we collect the data on how the volunteering takes place? What's the role for AI in volunteering? And I suppose back to the intergenerational things, I suppose I'm kind of, without stereotyping, or rather with stereotyping, I'm kind of thinking that we assume that younger people are going to be more tech savvy than some of the generations that went before.
I think that's a really good point to make. I'm far from a tech expert. I still struggle with Zoom sometimes. But I think one of the great things that has happened over the past few years, and was happening anyway, but maybe a silver lining from COVID that accelerated this, is that volunteering can kind of be done at any time, anywhere. And I think that's really important. Some of the successes we see with partners is, well, they'll give maybe a project to a student and say, like, come back, we'll check in once a week, or whatever it might be, but come back to us with the work once you've kind of finished with it. And that just allows a student to be at home or be in the library at, 6 p.m. on a Tuesday or 12 p.m. on a Sunday, and they can sort of have that remote working lifestyle where they can decide when they're volunteering, rather than the organisation or the volunteer manager saying, it's got to be Tuesday 9 till 12 every week. And they might be like, I really want to get involved in this, but I've got lectures, or I've got something else on a Tuesday from 9 to 12. But if they can take that work home, or work remotely, so to speak, or volunteer remotely, then they're able to do that. And again, we've seen some really big successes of that, and I feel that COVID accelerated that journey, because all of us were suddenly working from home, and we had to think differently about how we did everything. Of course, that was a silver lining. But I also feel that local communities and people talking to each other and doing that face-to-face stuff is still just as important as it ever was, despite the circumstances changing. That we can't kind of replace that. And one of the ways in which I see that is that our biggest event of the year, or two biggest events, are our volunteering fairs, where we'll get 50 organisations in a room and 500 students. Now, of course, we've got the website and we should take advantage of technology, but those face-to-face conversations are so important still, and really getting to know someone and understand their motivations, and likewise the student or the volunteer understand the organisation, their values, and where they're coming from, and what that might be. So I think we can take advantage of lots of the technological changes which are taking place, but we certainly shouldn't see it as a silver bullet, or in a way that we can change how we volunteer. It's still a person-to-person interaction more often than not.
I guess it's a double-edged sword, right? Which is that I'm thinking as sort of volunteering professionals here, and various points in my career where I've had to think about this, and like, we're often looking at technology because we want it to remove the barriers and we want it to make us more efficient to do the kind of things that you've just been talking about, right? To sort of, we want to be more efficient so we can double down on the connections aspect, which is more important. but maybe we need to be cautious, or at least I'm maybe hearing about a certain caution about how much energy we might put into that, because the risk is that we might expend so much time trying to get the perfect system that by the time we've built it, the new perfect system's around, and how much we've had to invest in that may mean we've had to neglect some of the more fundamental kind of experiential aspects of what we were trying to solve in the first place, maybe.
I feel like I'm having an existential crisis just after that little conversation there, because I completely agree. We're always looking to improve things, but we just need to make sure that we're being strategic as possible in regards to those things. There's no easy answer for it, unfortunately, which maybe sometimes we're told there is, but I've rarely found an easy answer.
As sort of volunteering professionals, many of us, we sort of have to be this kind of Swiss Army knife of expertise, right? Like, it's the systems, it's the marketing, it's the people management, it's the boots on the ground community engagement, it's the event planners, it's the we're doing all of it all of the time, and any one of those things can draw our attention away from any of those other things for a disproportionate amount of time. And it might not be the digital thing, but it might feel like the digital thing sometimes, depending on our comfort zone. And yeah, I'd never really thought about it like that until just now, but it feels to me that's something that's maybe important for us all to reflect on, is we need to do all of that stuff, but how do we make sure we can do it all and not compromise the thing that's really important to the people we're here to support?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Crises.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with that. I've been so fortunate in this role. As I said, we work with hundreds of NGOs over the years, and I've worked with just such brilliant volunteer managers, and I'm constantly inspired and blown away by what they achieve. But being a volunteer manager, and I appreciate I'm preaching to the converted here, is all of those things in a role spec and a skill set, and probably many more. You could probably come up with a list of 50 things in which you have to be good at to be a successful volunteer manager. It's so difficult, because how do you inspire? Basically, we're looking to inspire people to do something where they're getting no remuneration for it. But no, that's just the basic concept of that is extremely challenging to understand. So we have to think about all these other brilliant ways in which we can inspire people. And I see people do it obviously every single day, but it's extremely difficult job, and it's often done with extremely limited resources as well. Just last week we had the 20th anniversary of the Volunteer Centre. We kind of had a party, a celebration for it, which was really lovely. And I kind of made a series of pledges at the end of it to the LSE, to students, and to our charity partners as well. And it was along those lines of we want to help you as much as we possibly can, because we know you're being asked to do more and more with less and less, particularly over the past few years. So that's why, if we can provide you with research, if we can provide you with a consultancy service to look at your opportunities and give our honest feedback on them, if we can help promote them, all of those different types of things, I appreciate I'm in a privileged position where I am to be able to do that. So yeah, we want to do more, as much as we possibly can, for all of our partners. And I know the whole student volunteering network feels like that as well across the country, and I think it's really important to recognise that.
So David, we've covered an awful lot of ground. I don't want to lose the opportunity to ask you about your other role and the other organisation, or one of the other organisations that I know you're involved in, which is the Student Volunteering Network. And I'm sure listeners might be familiar, but they might want to hear a bit more about what the network does, because they also play a role in making sure there's student volunteering happening throughout the country. So do you want to tell us a bit more?
Absolutely. I mean, the Student Volunteering Network, I guess, is kind of like a trade association for people who do my job. It's volunteer managers, normally at universities or maybe colleges and schools as well, to a lesser degree. But it's a chance really for us to come together and have a bit of a chat about the things that are going well for us, and maybe some of the things which we're struggling with as well. But we also do things like put on national conferences and try and present information to charity partners, to local governments, national government, whatever it might be, kind of representing, north of 100,000 students who volunteer, probably much more than that, in fact, across the UK. Particularly when I first joined LSE, and as I said earlier, I was the only person doing the job. The Student Volunteering Network was a constant source of comfort for me, being able to talk to colleagues who really understood my job. We've done really well over the past few years, and we work closely with like AVM and NCVO and other kind of voluntary networks as well. But I guess it's just a small part of the voluntary world in which we can kind of talk about students.
Everyone should join a network. Anyone who's listened to this podcast before will know I'm really passionate about it. Get speaking to colleagues, get speaking to others, share ideas. That's like one of the key reasons we do this podcast, is to do some of that stuff. But yeah, any chance you get to do that, do it. It's really important. So thank you, David, for your role in sort of getting networks like that going and running. Really, really key. So I thought we would finish up with a real quick fire. And I guess just to wrap us off, we talked a lot about student volunteering. We've talked about some of the real success and exciting stuff at LSE and its partner organisations. I wondered if you could finish up with 3 sort of top tips for charities and organisations who are looking to maybe engage or involve more students in their volunteering. What would they be?
Okay, 3 top tips. That's a good question. I can think of 10, so I'll try and whittle it down to 3. My first one would be to go and speak to your local volunteer centre at a university. Pretty much every university will have someone responsible for kind of brokerage of volunteering opportunities, and there'll be a fountain of knowledge about their students and of course wider students as well. So go and speak to them. I mean, at LSE, we're happy to talk to any organisation and look over the roles which you might be advertising, or helping you think different, or providing research that we've been doing about our students. We can give you lots of tips about how to get onto campus and the best ways in which you can engage our students. So pick up the phone, send an email, whatever it might be, go and speak to your university volunteer centre. Tip number 2 is, and I don't think I need to tell this to many volunteer managers, but showcase your passion for the cause in which you're involved in. As I said earlier, our students are passionate about social change, and they want to work with people who are passionate about social change as well. So talk about it, exhibit it, showcase it, and you're much more likely to attract the student volunteers who kind of match that vibe. And finally, if and where possible, try and make it fun. Of course, it's a really serious job, sort of changing the world, and as I said earlier, we work with so many charities that are working on really, really important causes that affect so many of us, but it can still be really fun and rewarding at the same time. You can volunteer and go home with a smile. That's allowed whilst we're changing the world. So yeah, go and speak to your volunteer centre and be passionate about what you do, and try and make it fun at the same time as well.
David, thank you so much. You've been an absolutely fantastic guest, and it's been fantastic to hear about the great programs at LSE and the Student Volunteering Network. Thank you very much.
And David, if listeners want to get in touch or hear more about your work, how would they best do that?
If you go to @LSE Volunteering on any social network, you'll find us there, and they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or if you Google LSE Volunteer Centre, you'll find us on there as well. We'd be really happy to chat to any organisation anywhere across the world about how our students can volunteer with you.
Well, I'm hoping to get to the point where, as you said, our reach goes to every country in the world, just as LSE does. We've got a little way to go, but I do know we have some international listeners, so who knows, David. Thanks ever so much for joining us, and well, I found it fascinating, and Matt's already said he has, and I'm sure those listening will probably be in touch. Thanks very much for your time, David.
Thank you so much.
Well, Chris, another really interesting conversation there. What are some of the takeaways for you?
Well, there's so many. For me, in no particular order, I was really taken with the idea that volunteering is a habit. and that organisations may want to bring people in for short-term activities, but in a way that builds into a habit of volunteering. I love the insights around, yes, employability and skills are important, but actually, ultimately, the thing that really motivates his volunteers are changing the world, and we should talk with passion about that. I was really intrigued by the work he talked about around trauma-informed volunteering, and a shout out to Victim Sports Scotland, who I've done some work with, who I know have been along that journey. And I think that's something perhaps we might want to explore further in a future episode. And then, yes, I mean, maybe his wrap-up points at the end. Talk to your volunteering centres and your student networks. Showcase the passion that you have. And make sure the volunteering is fun. I mean, that's a lovely way for him to put that at the end. How about you?
I think the main thing for me I'm going to be reflecting on is the differentiation between the why and the how, and making sure we cover them both. But the how is particularly important, I think, and putting our energy and efforts into the how of volunteering, and the how of student involvement, and the how of intergenerational involvement, and the how of flexible opportunities, and what that really means. That's certainly something I'm going to be thinking about, and certainly challenging myself on in my work in the future, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, if you've liked what you've heard and you want to hear more, obviously follow, subscribe, or whatever your podcast platform asks you to do. And do, if you can, give us a high rating, because that helps us navigate our way to the top of the listing so other people get to hear what we're doing. And do share the podcast with your friends and colleagues if you think they'll be interested. And we're always after new guests. So if you think you know somebody who can bring some big thinking or some innovation and creativity to the world of volunteering, that will help move all of our experiences forward, then please link them up with us, and we'll do what we can to get them on the podcast and share those insights. So that's
Thanks,
it.
everyone.
That's it for this week's. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.